Just a little disclaimer before we begin. This video and this channel is for psychology students. So if you are a medical student or a doctor or something like that, please don't come at me in the comments saying that, oh, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention that, this is right, this is wrong, vagara vagara. Whatever I'm speaking in this video is taken from Pearson's psychology book, which is recommended to me by my college, and also from a textbook that is given to me by Mumbai University. So if you have any issue with whatever I'm saying, then you should just take it with this textbook and Mumbai University. Don't come at me in the comment section. What's up, you guys? Aditi. Welcome back to our channel. Today, yet again, we're going to talk about the brain, and my brain is super excited to talk about itself. I hope your brain is excited to learn about itself. This video, I think, is going to be way too long, so grab a cup of coffee or anything, or maybe your notebook and a pen so you can jot a few things down, and let's begin. Our human brain weighs around 3 pounds, which is about 2% of our body weight, and our brain contains around 100 billion neurons. If we cut our brain into half, we get to see this distinction of grey matter and white matter. So white matter is something on which the grey matter hangs on. White matter actually gives structure, it provides nutrients to the surrounding tissue, and it also allows communication to go back and forth. The grey matter is the wrinkly part that we see of the brain. In the pictures or when we imagine brain, that's the wrinkly part that we see is actually the grey matter. And it looks greyish pink because the tightly packed neural bodies are grey and the small blood vessels appear pink. The grey matter is also known as cortical tissue or cerebral cortex. Coming to the wrinkly part of the brain, as we were evolving, as we were becoming smarter as animals, as we were surviving better and producing more offsprings, we needed more and more space for brain tissue. But as you already know, skull mein to space is very limited. So what could the brain do, right? So if we have limited space in our closet or in our cupboard, and we have so much of clothes, we just push and push and push and we close the door, right? That's exactly what the brain did. So the brain got all wrinkly because of trying to fit itself inside the skull, and this wrinkling process is known as corticalization. So the notion here is that if you take the brain out and if you iron flatten it and if you measure it, it will be actually around 2 to 3 square feet. Now, if you see the upper part of these curves that you see, those are known as gyrus, or in plural, they're known as gyri. And you can see these indentations. The small indentations are known as the sulcus or sulci, and these bigger, deeper grooves or deeper indentations are known as fissures. So these fissures is how you can distinguish or separate these lobes and also hemispheres. Yup, our cerebrum is divided into 2 hemispheres, left hemisphere and right hemisphere. There are these 4 lobes that have been divided by these fissures. So the 4 lobes are occipital, temporal, parietal and frontal. Let's look at occipital first. Occipital lobe is at the back of the brain or the skull, and this area of the brain is all about vision. It processes visual information. So the visual information that comes to our eyes, it goes to the optic nerve and it passes through this area called as the lateral geniculate nucleus. We're just gonna call it LGN for the sake of this video, and then it goes to the occipital lobe. So this area, lateral geniculate nucleus, LGN, is located in the thalamus, and we already know what thalamus does. It is a relay center for our sensory information. So LGN does the exact same thing. It processes this visual input that it gets, and then it passes on to an area in the occipital lobe called as the visual primary cortex. So if this visual primary cortex is damaged, then we see this black spot called as the scotoma. So the visual primary cortex job is to get the visual information. Then there is this another area in the brain called as the visual association cortex or visual secondary cortex. It actually interprets. So what I'm trying to say is that looking or seeing or viewing an object is important, but interpreting that object or recognizing that object requires knowledge, matlab memory. So there is this fine line between visual or raw input and memory, and it's called as perception. So this visual association cortex job is to interpret, to perceive things so that we understand what that object is. So I'll give you an example so you understand this better. I'm going to put some lines placed in a particular way, and you can actually read them. You'll read them as the cat in the hat. I mean, how do you do that? They're just lines. And if you actually notice, the H and the A is the exact same stimulus. But still, if you look at the second word, you don't read it as CHT, you read it as CAT. So what the brain does here is that it takes all the information, the sensory information, it kind of combines it all, and then it makes sense of it. So our brain does not know the word CHT, but it knows CAT as a word, cat. So it looks at that word and it says, oh, that's cat likha hai wahan pe. Okay, so that is basically sensation and perception. I've already made a video about this. It's called as Gestalt Psychology. You can go and watch that video to learn more about this perception thingy. But what would happen if this process of perception is blocked? Then people whose perception area or this visual association cortex is blocked, they actually have this visual agnosia, which means that they can see things perfectly, but they have trouble interpreting it. So I had read about this one story or an incident about Oliver Sacks' patient where he was shown a glove, and he could only get the visual information. He was not given the glove in his hand. That patient had to look at the glove from a distance, and initially he was trying to make sense of what it is. So he said, oh, it has little pouches to keep coins, and he was trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what this thing is, but he just couldn't. And the second he was handed the glove, like the glove was given in his hand, immediately he put the glove in his hand and he was like, oh, it's a glove. So tactile sense was working and he could interpret what that thing is because of tactile by touching, but his visual sense wasn't working that well. So like the occipital lobe has this association area, all the other lobes also have this association area. I'll talk about association area as such later in this video, but right now we'll go and see the next lobe. Temporal lobe is about perceiving sounds of different sorts, and hence it is located right under our ears. So just like the occipital lobe, even the temporal lobe has the auditory primary cortex to get raw auditory input, and it also has the association area, auditory association area, to interpret and perceive that input. Like I've already mentioned that our brain is divided into two hemispheres, and each hemisphere has these four lobes. So the left temporal lobe, in most people, this area is devoted to language. Even some of the medial temporal lobe, amygdala and hippocampus is also involved in learning and memory. There are also some parts of the temporal lobe that help us in visual information, like the visual association area that is in the occipital lobe is also found in some parts of the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe. Now this lobe, the parietal lobe, is at the top but at the back of the brain. This area's primary cortex is devoted to touch. So if your body touches something, then there is this area in the parietal lobe called as the somatosensory cortex or the somatosensory strip or sensory strip is actually activated. So this area actually processes information from our skin and body receptors for touch, temperature and body positions. Even the taste is kind of processed in this area. Now this area, the somatosensory cortex, is at the front of the parietal lobe and it runs down on either sides of the brain, and the left side responds to sensations that we get on the right side and vice versa, and this is known as contralateral wiring or cross wiring. The cells at the top of the brain receive information from the bottom of the body, and as one moves down the area, the signals come from higher and higher in the body. Another thing about somatosensory cortex is that the amount of brain tissue that has been devoted to parts of the body does not depend upon the size of the part of the body. It actually depends on the importance that has been given to the sensation. So, for example, our facial areas and our hands are given the most brain tissue because our hands are primarily something that we use to touch and feel things the most. So, let's take this example. You are going to try to pinch your lips with your fingers. Like, try as hard as you can. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to ruin my lipstick, but try doing it, and you won't be able to do it so much because it will start to hurt. But try doing it to your elbow. Can you see what I'm doing? It does not hurt. It's because the brain tissue in the somatosensory cortex that is devoted to the elbow is very little. Because think about it, it makes sense, right? What do we do with our elbows? We sit on them. We put a lot of weight on them. So we don't want to feel pain, and we don't want so much of sensitivity in our elbows. Even the tongue and the mouth gets a lot of brain tissue in the somatosensory cortex because it is very important for us to feel the inside of our mouth when we are speaking. Like, although that is about motor cortex, but we also need the sensation in the mouth so that we know how we have to place our tongue in such a way and the mouth in such a way to produce sounds and to speak. Now, the last thing I want to talk about parietal lobe is that we generally always talk about the five senses, but there is this weird sixth sense called as proprioception, where we can feel our part of the body from the inside. So, for example, if you're sitting, just try to think like, what is my left big toe doing? And you can actually feel your left big toe on the inside. You can actually tell me like what it's doing and in which position it is in. That is proprioception. So proprioception is all about feeling every part of our body. So we can move inside in our body and feel every part of our body. So the left side of the parietal lobe's job is proprioception, and the right side is about sensing the world. So if your left side of the parietal lobe is damaged, you lose the ability to proprioception. So I know this story from Oliver Sacks' patient. She, in the middle of the night, she just woke up because she felt somebody's leg in her bed. So, like, what we would do, we would just pick it up and just throw it, and that's exactly what she did. She did not realize that it was her own leg, and when she threw her leg, she also went tumbling down the bed. Because this happened because she could not feel her left leg from the inside. And the right side of the parietal lobe is about sensing the world. So if the right side of the parietal lobe is damaged, we lose the ability to sense the world. So what happens is that people whose right side of the parietal lobe is damaged, they have this thing called as hemispatial neglect or unilateral spatial neglect. So these people, if you give them these drawings to draw, they will be able to draw the right side of the drawing with great detail, but they will kind of leave a lot of things from the left side. Frontal lobe actually makes up half of the brain. It is the newest part of the brain because if you see our ancestors, they had a much more sloped forehead, whereas we have a very straight forehead. So literally our skull has grown to make room for the frontal lobe. Our frontal lobe is very, very critical for all the complexities we see in human behavior. All the other, like the three lobes, is all about receiving input from the world, whereas frontal lobe is all about making sense of all that input and putting it into action. So all the higher mental functions are done here in the frontal lobe, like planning, personality, memory storage, complex decision making, and even the left frontal lobe along with the left temporal lobe. In many people, this area is devoted to language. The frontal lobe is also involved in controlling emotions by connecting to the limbic system. So the central area of the frontal lobe, called as the medial prefrontal cortex, and the bottom area that is right above our eye, known as the orbitofrontal prefrontal cortex, are all connected to the limbic system, which help in controlling our emotions. People with damaged frontal lobes may have their memories intact. They may even get high scores on their intelligence test and even have good skills. But they may not be able to plan ahead to begin the skilled task. The damage to the frontal lobe can also change a person's personality. So there was this one case of a railroad worker, Phineas Gage. He had an accident in 1848 where an iron rod went through his left cheek and it came out from the top of his head. But he was still able to immediately sit and walk, and even he started working pretty quickly. But when he started working after his accident, people noticed that he was not this friendly, sweet spoken person anymore. He had become irritable and disrespectful and dishonest person. He lacked emotional control because there was damage done to his prefrontal and orbitofrontal cortex and also connections to the limbic system, especially amygdala. People with damage to this area of the brain may have trouble performing mental tasks. They may get stuck on one step or one wrong answer and keep repeating it over and over again. And this phenomenon is called as perseveration. The frontal lobes also contain the motor cortex. It is the band of neurons that are located at the back of the frontal lobe. These cells control movements of our voluntary muscles by sending out commands to the somatic division of the peripheral nervous system. So when I want to move my hand, it's actually the motor cortex that is allowing me to do this. As you can see in the picture, it is adjacent to the somatosensory strip, which is in the parietal lobe. This mirror image layout allows for fast response times between the processing of sensory information and the production of motor neurons. So for example, if you touch something really squishy or really hot, then the somatosensory cortex will get the sensation of that squishiness or that heat, and then it will tell the motor cortex to send these messages to retract your hand back. Association areas are made up of these neurons that are devoted to making connections between the sensory information that is getting into the brain and the stored memories, images, and knowledge. So basically, association area help people to make sense of the sensory input. In the left frontal lobe is an area of the brain that we call Broca's area. This area is devoted to the production of speech. This area is called as the Broca's area because it was first studied by the 19th century neurologist Paul Broca. Paul Broca had a few patients who could not speak fluently, but they could understand when people spoke to them. So these people did not have the trouble in understanding what people were saying. They could understand that perfectly fine. They even knew what they wanted to say, but they couldn't control the production of speech. So either their speech is halting or they are mispronouncing words, like instead of saying cot, they are saying clock, or instead of saying nor, they are saying nine, something like that. And this is known as Broca's aphasia. Aphasia is an inability to understand or use written or spoken language. Now, another thing to remember about Broca's area is that it is not the only area in the brain that is responsible for production of speech, because there are other areas that work along with Broca's area, that is parietal lobe, frontal lobe, and also the motor cortex. So motor cortex is actually helping us move the muscles, our tongue, taking the air from our lungs, is doing all of that. Parietal lobe is actually sensing how we are speaking and making sure that we're speaking correctly, and frontal lobe is needed to actually think what we want to say. So all of these actually work together when we're actually speaking. Actually, right now when I'm doing this. In the left temporal lobe in most people is an area called as Wernicke's area. Now this area is known as Wernicke's area because it is named after Carl Wernicke, who was the first person who studied Wernicke's area. So a person whose Broca's area is working fine, he is able to speak fluently, but a person who has a damage in Wernicke's area has difficulty understanding that speech. So such kind of people whose Wernicke's area is damaged, they are said to have Wernicke's aphasia. So you can always remember Broca's area is production of speech, Wernicke's area is reception of speech. I know the video was way too long, but I did not want to make this video in 2 parts and break the links. So I hope this was alright. If you enjoyed this video and if you learned something from this, then don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up. Comment down below what other videos you want me to do, and subscribe to this channel, join the community, hit the bell notification so you'll be notified every time I post a new video. I'll see you next Friday with another psychology video.